In the dimly lit corner of a small apartment studio, a man stood before an easel, his eyes fixated on the blank canvas. The air was thick with the scent of oil paints and turpentine, the quiet hum of city life outside barely penetrating the solitude of his workspace. The artist, whose name was Malik, was no stranger to silence. It was within this silence that his true thoughts came to life, shaping not just the images on his canvases, but the very essence of his being. Malik had always known he was different. Even as a child, he could feel it, a pull towards something beyond ordinary perception. His drawings were never just sketches. They were windows into emotions, experiences, and memories that went deeper than the surface. By the time he reached adulthood, he was creating works that were praised by a few close friends, but dismissed by the larger world. His hands, though steady as he applied each stroke of paint, trembled with the quiet frustration of an artist whose brilliance went unrecognized. The world around him couldn't see what he saw in his own creations. No one understood. And though he loved painting, he felt a growing sense of emptiness, an emptiness that grew every time he walked into a gallery and saw his art overlooked in favor of flashier, trendier pieces. Today was no different. Malik had just returned from another trip to a high-end gallery in the city center. As always, he had hoped for something to change. Perhaps this time, someone would see the depth in his work. Maybe someone would recognize the subtle emotions embedded within the brushstrokes, the way a seemingly simple image could evoke feelings of loss, of strength, of hope. But instead, as always, he had been met with polite dismissals and empty praise. The gallery owner, a short, plump man named Vincent, had taken one look at Malik's paintings and sneered. "Abstract, yes," Vincent had said, circling one of Malik's larger pieces like a hawk. "But too unconventional. The market isn't ready for this." He didn't even bother to offer a real critique, as if he had already written Malik off the moment he saw the dark hues and raw emotional tone in his art. "Is this your best work?" Vincent had asked with an air of condescension. "It's a bit heavy, don't you think? Maybe you should try something lighter, more commercial. Less intense." Malik had stayed silent, a practiced mask of indifference on his face. He had heard it all before. Vincent had motioned to the brightly colored abstracts on the adjacent walls, their simplicity an apparent hit with the gallery's regulars. "These," he had said, tapping one with his finger, "these are what people want. Bright, happy, simple. People buy into that. But this is not what's going to sell." Malik could see the owner's eyes scanning over his work with the same detached indifference that most critics and curators had shown him over the years. They couldn't see the layers of meaning beneath the surface. They didn't understand that his paintings weren't just art, they were messages. But they didn't matter. Not to people like Vincent. He nodded, keeping his anger in check. He knew better than to argue with someone so set in their ways. "Thank you for your time," he said stiffly, his voice betraying no emotion. He turned and left the gallery, the door shutting behind him with a soft click. Back in his studio, Malik slumped down on the worn-out chair beside his easel. His fingers brushed over the latest canvas, an intricate swirl of dark blues and vibrant reds, a chaotic yet deliberate portrayal of the emotional turmoil he had been feeling recently. The piece represented the conflict between hope and despair, the way these two emotions could tear a person apart while simultaneously holding them together. But no one would understand that. No one but him. Malik's thoughts began to drift, as they always did when he faced such rejection. He thought of the early days when he first started painting, the thrill of creating something no one had seen before. He had once believed that all it would take was time, someone, somewhere, would eventually recognize his genius. It wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about being understood, being seen. But years had passed, and the world remained blind to him. His thoughts turned inward, back to the days when he first realized his unique gift. It hadn't been long after he started painting that he'd realized something unusual about his work. It wasn't just that his art was more emotive than others, it was that it seemed to have a life of its own. People who gazed at his paintings seemed to feel emotions more intensely. His works evoked reactions that were, at times, too powerful to be explained. He had never told anyone about it, not even his closest friends. It was something he had only recently begun to comprehend himself. His paintings weren't just skillful renditions of color and form, they were connected to something deeper, something within him. It wasn't magic, but it certainly felt like it at times. Malik's abilities had started small, barely noticeable. A simple portrait he painted once caused an old friend to burst into tears when they saw it. They hadn't known why, but the emotions in the painting had triggered something deep within them. It had terrified Malik at first. He hadn't known how to control it or even what it meant. But with time, he learned to focus and harness the power embedded within his brushstrokes. His art became an extension of his soul, and he began to realize that his works held more power than he could ever have imagined. But for now, it was a power he kept to himself. He painted for his own catharsis, creating pieces that explored the depths of human emotion and connection. And still, no one saw it. No one understood. Malik's fingers tightened around the edge of his easel, the frustration bubbling to the surface. He had grown tired of the cycle, the endless rounds of rejection, the sneers, the dismissive glances. There had to be more than this. He wasn't just some ordinary artist, creating for the sake of creation. He was meant for something greater. He could feel it in his bones. A sudden idea struck him, one he hadn't entertained before. What if he didn't need a gallery to see his worth? What if he could take control of his future, show the world his genius in a way they couldn't ignore? What if, instead of hoping for a gallery to take notice, he took the art world by storm? But how? The question lingered in his mind as he stared at his painting, the color swirling in an almost hypnotic dance. He could feel the pull of destiny, the weight of his potential. Maybe it was time to make his own way, without asking for permission. The thought brought a smile to his lips. For the first time in years, Malik felt a spark of hope. It was time to stop hiding and to show the world just who he was. Malik had spent days pacing his small apartment, thinking about his next move. He had to act fast. His paintings were beginning to attract attention, but the recognition was still too limited, too niche. He couldn't afford to wait for someone to notice him anymore. His time had come. The decision was made. Malik would return to the very gallery where he had been rejected, the one where Vincent, the dismissive gallery owner, had laughed off his work. But this time, things would be different. Malik would not be the humble artist seeking approval. No, he would walk in with his head held high, a man who knew his worth. He would show Vincent that he was not someone to be dismissed so easily. He stood before the mirror, adjusting the collar of his jacket, his reflection staring back at him with a quiet intensity. The man in the mirror was different from the one who had walked into the gallery weeks ago. He was no longer the frustrated, dismissed artist. He was someone who had discovered his own strength, someone who knew what his art was capable of. He was ready to claim the respect he deserved. The gallery was just a short walk away, nestled in the heart of the city. It stood in a grand building with tall windows that stretched from the floor to the ceiling, offering passers-by a glimpse of the curated masterpieces inside. When Malik stepped inside, the familiar scent of expensive wood and polished floors filled his nostrils, but there was a coldness here. This was a place for the elite, a world where only the best, and often the wealthiest, could play. The sound of his shoes echoed across the polished floors as he entered the gallery. He didn't have to wait long before he was spotted. Vincent appeared from behind a corner, his round face twisting into a smile that barely concealed the skepticism in his eyes. "Ah, Malik, back again?" Vincent said, his tone polite but dripping with an air of superiority. "I see you've come for more advice. Perhaps you'll consider revising your work after all." Malik didn't smile. Instead, he met Vincent's eyes with a gaze that was steady and unwavering. "I'm not here for advice," Malik said, his voice low but firm. "I'm here to show you something." Vincent raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Show me something?" he repeated. "And what might that be? Another one of your abstract pieces?" "I brought a few new works," Malik said. "And I think you'll find them different from what you've seen before." Vincent's expression remained unchanged, though Malik could see the slight twitch in his eye. His curiosity was piqued, but he wasn't about to let that show. "All right, then. Let's take a look," he said, leading Malik down one of the gallery's pristine hallways lined with frames of various sizes. As they walked, Malik could feel the tension in the air, the weight of expectations and judgment. This was the moment that would define his path. He could feel the power of his art simmering beneath his skin, as if his paintings themselves were urging him to make an impression. When they reached a small, empty section of the gallery, Malik carefully placed a rolled-up canvas against the wall. Vincent watched him closely, arms crossed over his chest, a skeptical smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Let's see what you've brought, then," Vincent said, almost mockingly. Malik unrolled the canvas with a precise motion, revealing the painting beneath. It was striking, a swirl of colors that seemed to bleed into one another, capturing the tension of a struggle between two forces. One half of the canvas was dark and heavy, swirling with deep blues and purples, while the other was a fiery, bright contrast of oranges and reds. The emotional power was undeniable. Vincent took a step closer, his eyes scanning the piece with a critical eye. For a moment, there was silence. Malik stood there, watching as the gallery owner's expression shifted from one of smug amusement to something resembling discomfort. Vincent's brow furrowed as he examined the painting in greater detail. This is different," Vincent said slowly, his voice betraying a hint of surprise. "It's intense, very intense. But still, too abstract, don't you think? It lacks the polish of what the buyers want. It's raw, yes, but not refined enough." Malik didn't respond immediately. He knew better than to argue with the man. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a few smaller paintings, unrolling them one by one. Each one was bold, raw, and filled with emotion. Yet they were not traditional works by any means. They conveyed a sense of urgency, of emotional conflict, of a world turned upside down. As the paintings filled the space around them, Vincent's skepticism only seemed to grow. He shifted uncomfortably on his feet, his eyes darting from one piece to the next. Malik could see it now, Vincent didn't know what to make of it. He was a man who valued traditional beauty, precision, and order. These pieces were something else entirely. They challenged his concept of what art could be. "This," Malik said quietly, "is not just about what's on the surface. It's about what the painting makes you feel." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle between them. "Art doesn't need to be easy to understand. It needs to make you feel something. And that's what my work does." Vincent was silent for a long moment, staring at one of the larger pieces. The air between them felt thick, charged. For the first time, Malik saw the gallery owner's carefully constructed facade crack slightly, his usual arrogance slipping just enough to reveal a flicker of uncertainty. "I still don't know if I can sell this kind of work," Vincent said finally, his voice guarded. "It's too emotional. Too personal. Buyers want something they can hang over their mantelpieces and show off to their friends, not something that makes them feel uncomfortable." "Then maybe the problem is with the buyers, not the art," Malik replied, his voice cool but insistent. "Art should challenge the viewer, not placate them." Vincent shook his head slowly, a tight smile forming on his lips. "You're very passionate, Malik. I'll give you that. But passion doesn't pay the bills." Malik didn't back down. "I'm not asking for approval. I'm telling you that my work will change this gallery, if you can open your mind long enough to see it." The words hung in the air like an ultimatum. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't speak. He was thinking, weighing his options. Malik could sense the tension, the internal battle. He could feel it now. Vincent was beginning to understand. He was beginning to see that Malik was not just any artist. There was something more here. But would he accept it? Would he realize that art had evolved beyond the confines of tradition? Malik wasn't sure, but he was willing to give it everything he had. This was his moment. And no matter how hard Vincent tried to dismiss him, Malik was determined to make him see what he had been blind to for so long. As Malik left the gallery, he felt a mixture of exhilaration and frustration swirling within him. The encounter with Vincent had left him unsettled. The gallery owner had hesitated, his skepticism still lingering, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. Malik knew that Vincent was beginning to see the raw power in his work, but the man's conventional mindset kept him from fully embracing it. That was the problem with the art world. They valued aesthetics over substance, prestige over true emotion. But Malik's art was more than just something to be admired, it was something to be experienced. Walking through the busy streets, Malik reflected on how he had arrived at this point. How had his art evolved into something that transcended mere paint and canvas? How had his works come to possess a power that was both mystifying and overwhelming? He stopped by the edge of a park, leaning against a tree, lost in thought. It had been a long time since he'd fully processed the strange origins of his ability. He had always felt different, even as a child. While others played sports or immersed themselves in books, Malik had spent his time drawing. He would sketch for hours, creating worlds and characters that didn't exist, yet, somehow, they felt real to him. But it wasn't until his teenage years that he began to realize his connection to his art was deeper than anyone could have imagined. The first time Malik had truly sensed something unusual was during a school art project. He had been working on a painting of a woman sitting alone in a dimly lit room, her face half covered in shadow. It was a simple scene, but the emotions it evoked were powerful. As Malik painted, he felt an intense pull, an energy he couldn't explain. The longer he worked, the stronger the feeling became. It was as if the woman in the painting were alive, her sorrow and isolation seeping into Malik's very being. He hadn't understood it at first. He had thought it was just his own emotions, his own connection to the subject. But when his teacher and classmates viewed the finished piece, their reactions were strange. His teacher, a quiet woman named Ms. Lawson, had begun to cry the moment she laid eyes on it. She wasn't a woman prone to tears, yet she wept for what seemed like an eternity, unable to stop herself. Malik had been frightened. He didn't understand why his art was affecting people in such a profound way. He hadn't intended for it to be that powerful, and yet, the emotions within the painting seemed to have a life of their own. His classmates also reacted strangely. Some said the painting made them feel sad, others felt anger or confusion. Malik had no explanation for it, but the power of his work had become undeniable. Over time, he began to realize that his art was more than just a reflection of his emotions, it was a gateway into the feelings of others. His paintings could tap into the deepest recesses of the human soul, unlocking memories, desires, and pains that people didn't even know they had. His work had the ability to alter perception, to make people feel things they weren't prepared to feel. As he grew older and honed his skills, Malik began to experiment with this strange ability. He learned to focus his emotions, to channel them into his paintings with greater precision. He began to create works that didn't just capture a moment, but transformed it. His brushstrokes became conduits for raw emotion, for experiences that went beyond the physical world. His greatest creation came about during a particularly dark period in his life. Malik had been grappling with loss of a loved one, loss of hope, loss of his place in the world. It was during this time that he painted one of his most powerful pieces, a chaotic swirl of colors that seemed to bleed into one another, as though the emotions were bleeding onto the canvas itself. When the painting was finished, Malik felt a sense of relief. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from him. He looked at the piece, and for the first time, he could feel the emotions of the painting filling the room around him, grief, sorrow, but also a sense of peace. That was when he realized the true scope of his power. His paintings weren't just images, they were living, breathing entities. They carried his emotions, his thoughts, his essence. And they could reach people in ways words never could. But Malik had kept this secret to himself. He knew that revealing the full extent of his abilities would only make people wary, make them think he was something other than human. art was supposed to be about beauty, about expression, not manipulation. But the truth was that his art was a form of influence, a way to touch the hearts and minds of others in ways that went beyond what was natural. Over the years, Malik had tried to ignore this part of himself. He had painted for catharsis, for his own peace of mind, never fully confronting the power within him. But now, as he stood on the edge of the park, reflecting on his recent encounter with Vincent, he realized that this power couldn't be hidden forever. His art had the potential to change the world, if only he could find a way to show people its true value. That thought lingered in his mind as he returned to his apartment. He knew that the world would never see his worth if he continued to hide. If he wanted to prove that his work was more than just art, he needed to take control. He needed to be bold. Malik spent the next few days preparing for his next move. He didn't just want to sell his paintings. He wanted to prove to the world that his work had a depth that could not be ignored. He was no longer going to be the artist waiting for approval, he was going to force the world to see his genius. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, Malik set his plan into motion. He reached out to a few trusted collectors who had shown interest in his work over the years. He explained that he had new pieces, more powerful than anything he had ever done before. He didn't go into detail about the influence his art had, but he made it clear that these paintings were special, unlike anything the world had ever seen. Soon, the buzz began. Malik's name spread through the art world like wildfire, though no one could quite explain why his work had suddenly gained so much attention. Some thought it was just a trend, others sensed that there was something more, something deeper. But the more his paintings were discussed, the more intrigued people became. Vincent, too, began to hear the whispers. Rumors of Malik's new work, rumors of its power and depth, began to filter into the gallery scene. People who had once ignored him now wanted to see for themselves what Malik had created. And so, it was time for the next step. Malik had been patient long enough. It was time to let his art speak for itself, and he had no intention of letting anyone underestimate him again. As the days passed, the anticipation surrounding Malik's work grew. The art world had always been a place of exclusivity, where recognition was reserved for a select few, and talent often took a back seat to the whims of the wealthy and influential. But Malik's paintings were different. They didn't follow the conventional norms. They were raw, emotional, and unnerving, exactly what the world didn't know it needed. The power of his work was undeniable, and though few could explain why, people were drawn to it. They couldn't resist. Malik could feel the shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't just the art world that had begun to take notice, it was everyone. People who had once dismissed his paintings as nothing more than abstract doodles now couldn't stop talking about them. From high-end collectors to museum curators, to critics who had never given him the time of day, everyone seemed captivated by the rumors surrounding his art. Vincent, too, felt the pressure. The gallery owner had never been one to admit his mistakes, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore Malik's growing influence. He knew the artist's name was becoming synonymous with innovation, with power. But he couldn't bring himself to fully embrace the idea. Vincent had spent his entire career building a brand based on safe, marketable art, the kind of art that had a clean, controlled narrative. Malik's pieces didn't fit into that narrative. They were too raw, too unpredictable. And yet, there was something about them that made Vincent nervous. There was an energy in Malik's work that he couldn't ignore. Something more than just emotion, something that reached deeper into the human psyche. He had tried to distance himself from Malik, hoping the artist's rise would be just a fleeting trend. But that was no longer possible. The world had spoken, and Malik's time had come. It was a Saturday afternoon when Malik received the call. He had been in his studio, putting the finishing touches on a new piece, when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but when he answered, the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Malik, it's Vincent," the gallery owner said, his tone clipped and formal. "I've been hearing a lot of buzz about your work lately. And, well, let's just say that I'm intrigued. I've seen the pieces, but I think I may have misjudged their impact." I'd like to discuss a collaboration. Malik stood still for a moment, the words hanging in the air. He had expected this, of course. The art world was a fickle beast, and the moment someone realized the power of his work, they'd come knocking. But he wasn't going to make it easy for Vincent. He wasn't about to let the same man who had rejected him dictate his future. I'm listening, Malik replied coolly, his voice betraying none of the emotion he was feeling. I propose an exhibition, Vincent continued, his voice slightly more eager now. We'll showcase your pieces alongside some of the gallery's more traditional works. I think it'll be a good fit, and it'll give your art the exposure it deserves. We'll make sure it's a big event, press, collectors, the whole deal. Malik remained silent for a moment, weighing his options. It wasn't the first time Vincent had tried to entice him with promises of fame and wealth. But Malik had learned long ago that the art world didn't operate on fairness. It operated on power, and he wasn't about to let himself be used as a pawn in Vincent's game. I'm not interested in playing your game, Vincent, Malik said, his tone sharp. If you want to work with me, it's on my terms. I won't be part of your controlled narrative. I'm not just another artist you can mold into your image. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Malik could practically hear Vincent's wheels turning as he processed the rejection. But when he spoke again, there was a note of desperation in his voice. Malik, I understand your concerns, but this is an opportunity, Vincent said, trying to sound reasonable. Your work is powerful, but it needs to be seen by the right people. I can get you the exposure you need, the recognition you deserve. We'll work together to make sure your pieces are appreciated for what they truly are. I don't need you to make my work valuable, Malik shot back. It's valuable because it speaks for itself. If you can't see that, then we have nothing to talk about. Malik ended the call before Vincent could say anything more. He wasn't going to let the gallery owner use his art for his own gain. Malik had seen too many artists fall into that trap, their work slowly stripped of its soul as it became a commodity for the rich and powerful to flaunt. He wasn't going to let that happen to him. Not now. As the days passed, Malik continued to receive calls and messages from various collectors and art critics. His phone buzzed constantly with offers, but he ignored them all. His work was no longer about gaining recognition or selling paintings. It was about something much deeper, a way to show the world the true power of emotion and expression. His paintings were a reflection of the human experience in all its complexity. They didn't need to be validated by the art world. They were already valuable because they were real. Malik's resolve only grew stronger as his fame spread. People began to seek out his work, desperate to experience the emotions his pieces evoked. Collectors who had once scoffed at his art were now willing to pay astronomical sums for a single painting. But Malik didn't care about the money. He cared about the impact of his work, the way it changed people's lives. His paintings were more than just images, they were windows into the human soul. And yet, despite his success, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The world was beginning to recognize his art, but it still didn't understand him. They saw the power of his work, but they didn't know its true source. They didn't know the secret that lay behind every brushstroke, every swirl of color. They didn't know that Malik's art wasn't just a reflection of his emotions, it was an extension of his very being. The secret of his power lay not in the paint or the canvas, but in the energy he poured into his creations. Every emotion, every thought, every moment of his life was infused into his paintings. His art was a channel for his essence, a way to make the intangible tangible. And the more people experienced it, the more they were drawn into his world. But Malik knew that he couldn't keep this secret forever. If he wanted the world to truly understand his work, he would have to reveal the truth. It wasn't just about the art. It was about what the art could do. And to do that, he would have to confront his own power and embrace it fully. Malik sat quietly in his studio, staring at the blank canvas before him. It was the same feeling he had every time he began a new piece, a sense of anticipation, but also a nagging doubt. What would this piece reveal? What emotion would he channel into it this time? And, most importantly, would it expose the truth he had been hiding for so long? The truth about his art wasn't just its ability to make people feel, it was its power to influence them, to change them. Malik's paintings could do more than just evoke emotion. They could alter perceptions, twist reality. The moment someone laid eyes on one of his pieces, they were no longer just an observer, they were part of the story, part of the feeling. And that power, Malik knew, was dangerous. For years, he had kept this part of his abilities hidden. He had controlled his power, never fully allowing it to manifest in a way that could be noticed by anyone outside of his immediate circle. His paintings had always been a personal journey, a way for him to process his own emotions, his own experiences. But as his fame grew, so did the temptation to push his art further, to use it to influence the world in ways he had never imagined. It was that temptation that led him to this point, to this moment where he would have to make a decision. The art world was at his feet. The critics, the collectors, the museums, they all wanted his work. They were all clamoring for a piece of Malik's genius. But what if his art wasn't just meant for admiration? What if it was meant for something more? What if it had the power to change society, to shape the world in ways no one could predict? The idea had been growing in Malik's mind for months. His art had always been a reflection of his own inner struggles, but now, he saw it as a tool, a weapon, even, that could be used to influence the thoughts and actions of others. He had always rejected the idea of controlling people, of manipulating them for his own gain. But as he thought about the way his work had affected people over the years, the way it had made them feel things they couldn't explain, the way it had made them think in ways they never had before, he began to wonder if he had a responsibility to push his art further. Could he create a piece that would inspire change, that would make people see the world in a new way? Could he use his art to shape the future? He didn't know. But he knew one thing for certain, his time of hiding was over. The world was ready for the truth. It was a week later when Malik made his decision. He had spent the past several days locked in his studio, painting non-stop. His mind had been consumed by the idea of revealing the full extent of his power. And the piece he was creating now would be the one to do it. It would be the one to expose the true nature of his art, and his abilities. The painting was unlike anything he had ever done before. It wasn't just a depiction of emotion, it was an immersive experience. The brushstrokes were wild, erratic, as though the paint itself was alive, constantly shifting and morphing as he worked. The colors swirled together in a chaotic frenzy, creating a sense of tension and unease. But beneath the chaos, there was a thread of something deeper, something that Malik couldn't quite put into words. As he painted, Malik could feel his power growing. His emotions, his thoughts, his very essence flowed into the canvas like an unstoppable current. And as the piece took shape, he felt something shift within him. The more he painted, the more he felt his connection to the world around him grow stronger. The canvas was no longer just an object, it was a gateway, a portal to a new reality. When the painting was finished, Malik stood back and stared at it. He could feel the energy emanating from the canvas, pulsating with an intensity he had never experienced before. It was as if the painting was alive, vibrating with an energy that was almost tangible. He knew that this piece would change everything. But Malik also knew that he couldn't keep this power to himself any longer. If he was going to show the world what his art could do, he would have to expose the truth. He would have to reveal the full extent of his abilities. That night, he called Vincent. The gallery owner had been relentless in his pursuit of Malik's work, and Malik knew that Vincent would be the perfect person to help him launch this revelation into the world. He didn't trust Vincent, but he also knew that the gallery owner's connections and resources would be invaluable in getting the world to pay attention. "Vincent, I'm ready," Malik said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "I'm going to show the world what my art can really do." Vincent's voice on the other end of the line was cautious, but intrigued. "What do you mean, Malik? What are you planning?" "I'm going to unveil a new piece," Malik replied. "A piece that will expose everything. The power of my art. The truth behind it. I'm not just an artist, Vincent. I'm something more. There was a long pause before Vincent spoke again. You're not talking about some gimmick, are you? You're serious? I'm dead serious, Malik said, his voice firm. I'm not just trying to sell paintings anymore. This is bigger than that. I don't know if I fully understand, but if you're serious, then I'll help you. Let's make this a moment the world won't forget. Malik hung up the phone, a sense of finality settling over him. It was time. There was no turning back now. The following week, Malik's new exhibition was scheduled to open at Vincent's gallery. The buzz surrounding it was electric. People from all over the art world were eager to see what Malik had created. But no one knew what to expect. There were rumors that his new pieces were unlike anything he had ever done before, more powerful, more emotional, more intense. As the doors to the gallery opened on the night of the exhibition, the crowd surged inside, eager to witness the unveiling of Malik's latest work. The room was filled with a sense of anticipation, and Malik stood at the center of it all, watching as people moved from one painting to the next, their reactions varying from awe to disbelief. And then they reached his newest piece, the one he had been working on for weeks. It stood alone in the center of the room, its chaotic energy filling the space. The moment anyone laid eyes on it, they felt it, the power, the intensity, the truth. The painting wasn't just a depiction of emotion, it was a force, a presence that seemed to reach out and touch them, pulling them into its world. Some people gasped. Others took a step back, overwhelmed by the raw energy radiating from the piece. And some began to cry, unable to understand why they were feeling such intense emotions. But Malik stood there, watching them. He didn't need to say a word. The painting spoke for itself. It was at that moment that Malik realized something profound. His art was no longer just a reflection of his emotions, it was a conduit for change. It had the power to alter perception, to make people see the world in a new light. And now, with the truth exposed, he had the ability to shape the future. The world would never be the same again. The aftermath of the exhibition was unlike anything Malik had ever experienced. As soon as the night ended, his phone started ringing nonstop, flooded with messages, calls, and emails. Critics, collectors, curators, and even fellow artists were reaching out to him. Everyone had an opinion about his new work, but the one thing they all had in common was awe. They were stunned, mesmerized, and, in many cases, terrified by what they had witnessed. Malik had expected shock, perhaps even some controversy, but he hadn't anticipated this level of impact. His painting wasn't just a display of emotion, it was a mirror to humanity's deepest fears, desires, and aspirations. People saw parts of themselves in it, and the intensity of those reactions was overwhelming. The world was no longer just admiring his art, they were feeling it, living it. It wasn't long before Malik began to notice the changes in the world around him. The ripple effect of his work was far-reaching, touching people in ways he couldn't have predicted. Stories of transformative experiences began to circulate, with individuals reporting profound shifts in their perceptions of life, their understanding of themselves, and even their relationships with others. His painting had become more than just art, it had become a catalyst for personal change, sparking revelations that left many questioning the nature of reality itself. In cities all over the world, small communities of people began to form around Malik's work. These were not art collectors or critics, they were everyday people who had been moved by his paintings, who had felt something deep inside them stir when they gazed upon the images. Some claimed to have seen visions, others spoke of overwhelming emotions that had never been so real. It was as though Malik's art had unlocked something hidden within them, something that had always been there, but had remained dormant. But as the days went by, Malik realized that his painting had done more than just awaken people's emotions, it had started to alter the course of their lives. People who had once felt directionless began to find purpose. Relationships that had been broken and fractured healed. Even the way people interacted with the world changed, an increased sense of empathy, a greater awareness of the struggles and pain of others. Malik's art had connected them, not just to their inner selves, but to one another. It was as if the energy within the painting had spread outwards, infecting every individual who came into contact with it. And the more they shared their experiences, the more others were drawn to the work. The ripple effect was growing stronger, spreading farther, with each passing day. But Malik couldn't shake the feeling that this power came with a heavy responsibility. He had always believed in the integrity of his art, in its ability to speak truth without manipulation. But now, as he watched the changes unfold, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Was it right for him to wield such power? Was it fair to change people's lives in such a profound way, without fully understanding the consequences? The thoughts haunted him day and night. What if his art was starting to manipulate people, bending their wills in ways they didn't understand? What if the transformations were not a result of their own growth, but a byproduct of his art's influence, an influence he hadn't fully comprehended? He had always wanted his work to be a reflection of truth, but now, it was becoming more than that. It was changing the very fabric of society. Malik decided that he needed answers. He couldn't just let things continue on without understanding the true nature of his work. And so, he sought out the people who had been affected most deeply by his art, those who had undergone the most dramatic transformations. If anyone could shed light on the true impact of his work, it was them. The first person he spoke to was Eva, a woman in her early 30s who had come to the exhibition as a skeptic. A self-proclaimed art critic, she had initially dismissed Malik's work as another trendy, overhyped collection. But after seeing his new piece, she had an entirely different perspective. Her experience with the painting had left her shaken, unable to shake the feeling that something deep inside her had changed. "I don't even know how to describe it," Eva confessed, her voice trembling as she recounted the experience. "It was like I was transported somewhere else. I saw visions, vivid, colorful visions. I felt everything, every emotion, every moment of my life, all at once. And then, when I came back to reality, I couldn't look at the world the same way again. It was like I had been awakened." Malik listened intently, trying to understand the depth of her experience. "Do you think it was the painting that caused this shift?" he asked, his voice soft, yet filled with curiosity. Eva nodded. "I know it sounds crazy, but yes. I've never felt more alive, more aware of everything around me. I understand people now in ways I never did before. I can see their pain, their joy, their struggles. I feel connected to the world in a way that's almost overwhelming." Malik's heart sank. This was exactly what he had feared. His art had become more than just an emotional experience, it had become a gateway to something far more powerful. And now, Eva wasn't the only one. Everywhere he looked, people were speaking about the same type of experience. His painting had started something that could change the course of human history. Eva wasn't the only one who had undergone such a transformation. Malik spoke to several others who had similar stories to tell. They described feelings of enlightenment, of connection, of newfound purpose. The more Malik heard, the more he realized the scale of what he had created. But he also realized that he couldn't control it. The energy he had unleashed had a life of its own, and it was moving through the world in ways that were impossible to predict. The ripple effect was no longer just confined to a small circle of people. It had spread across continents. Governments, religious institutions, and major corporations were all beginning to take notice of the widespread changes taking place. Some saw it as a threat to the status quo. Others saw it as a potential opportunity for revolution. But no matter how they viewed it, one thing was clear: Malik's art had sparked something much bigger than just an artistic movement. And as the ripple effect grew stronger, Malik found himself at the center of a storm that was quickly spiraling out of control. People were starting to demand more from him. They wanted answers, they wanted guidance. They wanted to know how to harness the power of his art and use it to shape their own futures. Malik wasn't sure he could handle it. He had never intended to be a leader, never wanted to shape the world with his work. But now, it seemed that the world was asking him to do just that. One night, as Malik sat alone in his studio, staring at the painting that had started it all, he knew that his life would never be the same. The world was changing. His art had changed it. And there was no going back. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but at the same time, there was a sense of excitement, a thrill that came from knowing that he had the power to shape the future. The question now was not whether or not he could handle the responsibility, but whether or not he should. The weight of the world was on Malik's shoulders, and it was only growing heavier by the day. As the ripple effect of his art spread, the demands on him grew more intense. People weren't just seeking his art anymore, they were seeking him, the man behind the work. They wanted to know what he had discovered, what insights he had gained, and how they could tap into the power that had transformed their lives. But Malik wasn't sure if he had the answers. In fact, he was starting to doubt whether anyone truly understood the full scope of what had been set in motion. Every day, new faces appeared in his gallery, in his studio, at his doorstep. Some were curious seekers, hoping to experience the same awakening that had so profoundly changed others. Some were skeptics, hoping to uncover the secret behind his art, searching for the trick or illusion that would explain what they had witnessed. And others were opportunists, businessmen, politicians, and influencers, looking for a way to harness Malik's power for their own gain. Malik found himself in a constant battle with the world's expectations of him. He had created something beyond his control, something that was bigger than art, bigger than himself. And while he couldn't deny the profound impact it had on people's lives, he couldn't help but wonder, was this really what he had intended? Or had his desire for recognition, for validation, led him down a path where his own power was now out of his grasp? He had always believed in art as a reflection of the human experience, a way to explore the depths of emotion and the mysteries of the soul. But now, his work had become something else entirely. His art had become a force, a catalyst for change, yes, but also something far more dangerous. The more people interacted with it, the more they became consumed by it. They felt its power, yes, but at what cost? Malik's studio had turned into a sanctuary and a prison at the same time. It was a place where he could retreat from the world, where he could work in solitude, trying to understand the strange, almost mystical connection between himself and his art. But it was also a place where the demands of the world pressed in on him, where every brushstroke, every line, every color he put down was scrutinized by others. They no longer saw him just as an artist, they saw him as a leader, a visionary, someone who had unlocked the keys to the universe. And Malik couldn't help but wonder if he was capable of leading anyone, let alone changing the world. The truth was, he wasn't sure he was ready for the responsibility he had taken on. He had been so focused on the beauty of his art, on the way it made people feel, that he hadn't fully grasped the power he was wielding. But there was no going back now. The world had already changed, and Malik was at its center. The question now was how he would navigate this new reality. Could he embrace his role as a visionary, a leader? Or would he retreat from it, abandoning his gift before it consumed him? It was in this moment of doubt that Malik received an unexpected visit. Vincent, the gallery owner who had once mocked him, the man who had dismissed his work as nothing more than a passing trend, appeared at his door. He wasn't alone. A group of people stood behind him, each one dressed in suits, each one carrying an air of power and influence. "Malik," Vincent said, his voice unusually respectful. "We need to talk." Malik looked at him, unsure of what to expect. The last time he had seen Vincent, the gallery owner had been dismissive, condescending, and eager to profit from Malik's work. But now, he seemed different, more subdued, even wary. "I don't know what you want, Vincent," Malik said, his voice cool. "I've been receiving a lot of requests lately, and I'm not sure I can help anyone else. I didn't create my art to be a tool for manipulation or control." Vincent nodded, acknowledging Malik's words. "I understand. But that's not why we're here. We're not looking to manipulate you, Malik. We're here because we need your help. The world needs your help." Malik raised an eyebrow. "The world? I'm not some messiah, Vincent. I'm just a man who paints." Vincent's eyes darkened. "You're more than that. You've changed things, more than you realize. And now, the world is watching you. They want to know what comes next. They want to know how to unlock the potential you've revealed. People are scared, Malik. They don't know what to do with what you've given them. And in some cases, they're using it for the wrong reasons. Malik felt a knot form in his stomach. What do you mean? What's happening? The influence of your art is spreading, Vincent said, his tone serious. And while some people are using it for personal growth, others are exploiting it for power, for control. There are groups out there, factions, that want to use your work to manipulate society. They want to weaponize it. Malik's heart sank. This was what he had feared. His art, his gift, was being twisted, perverted into something it was never meant to be. He had never intended for his work to be used for power plays or manipulation, but now it seemed inevitable. The world was changing, and some people were more interested in harnessing his art for their own gain than for its true potential. What do you want me to do? Malik asked, his voice tight with frustration. I never wanted this to happen. I can't control the way people react to my art. I can't make them see it the way I do. You're right, Vincent replied. But you can still guide them. You can still show them how to use your art for good, how to harness its power responsibly. People are looking to you for answers, Malik. You have a chance to lead this change, to make sure it doesn't spiral out of control. If you walk away now, there's no telling what might happen. Malik stared at Vincent, considering his words. It was true that he had never asked for this responsibility, but the reality was that he couldn't escape it. He had created something powerful, something that could shape the future. And if he abandoned it, if he walked away from the influence he now had, he risked losing the chance to guide the world toward a better future. The decision was clear, but it wasn't easy. Malik wasn't sure he was ready for the weight of leadership, but he knew one thing: if anyone was going to steer this new world in the right direction, it had to be him. I'll do it, Malik said, his voice steady with resolve. I'll help. But on my terms. Vincent smiled, a look of relief washing over his face. We'll support you, Malik. We'll make sure you have everything you need to guide people. You're not in this alone. Malik nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities. This was just the beginning. He had created something that had the potential to change the world, but now, it was up to him to make sure that change was for the better. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Malik was ready. He had a vision, and he would see it through. The world was waiting for him to lead.